Okay, so we have the axial and appendicular skeleton. The axial skeleton is the head and torso, while the appendicular skeleton includes the shoulders and arms, and the pelvis and legs. So we're going to finish up talking about the axial skeleton in this section. Starting with the vertebrae. So there's 7 cervical vertebrae, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, the sacrum, which is actually 5 fused vertebrae, and then a coccyx, which is 1 tailbone. Animals that have tails have extended coccygeal vertebrae. So they have anywhere from 2 to, 25 or even more than that of these vertebrae. So this is a picture of the human spine, and the different types of vertebrae are highlighted. So you can see the 7 cervical vertebrae, the 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, the sacrum, and then the coccyx. So you need to be able to look at a vertebrae and tell me which one is which just by looking at its structure. Cervical vertebrae are easy to tell that they're cervical because they have this big, huge hole known as the vertebral foramen, but then they also have these tiny holes here. And that's for the cervical plexus nerves to go through, or the nerves that help supply feeling to different regions around the neck. So these transverse foramen are unique to the cervical vertebrae. Thoracic vertebrae, if you look at them from the side, have this sharp angle and this long spinous process. Lumbar vertebrae are the largest. They have the largest and widest body, and then they have these short processes that stick out. With the cervical vertebrae, the first 2 cervical vertebrae, C1 and C2, have very special names because they do a pretty important thing in the body. The atlas is C1 and the axis is C2. The atlas looks almost like an oval, and it really doesn't have that much of a spinous process. The atlas is going to sit on top of the axis, and these 2 bones glide past each other, rotate past each other in order to allow you to move your head back and forth. This is called the dens. It's a little thumb-like structure that's actually thinner than the thickness of a standard human thumb. And this is what the entire head rotates around, is this tiny little nub that sticks up. So the axis is C2, and it has the dens, which allows for head rotation, and atlas sits on top of the axis. Some of the parts of the vertebrae that you should know include the body, which is this big wide region, the vertebral foramen, which is the hole for the spinal cord. Spinous process is the long process that sticks out in the middle. Transverse processes stick out like wings on the sides of the vertebrae. And then there's the intervertebral foramen, which is the hole that's formed when vertebrae are stacked on top of each other. This allows our spinal nerves to emerge and innervate the rest of the body. And then for cervical vertebrae only, we have these transverse foramina. And those are the holes that allow for the nerves of the cervical plexus to go through them. As far as the ribs go here, we have 3 different types of ribs: true, false, and floating, although floating ribs are also considered false ribs. A true rib is going to be ribs 1 through 7. And what makes it a true rib is that it connects directly to the sternum with its own line of cartilage. A false rib connects to the cartilage of a neighboring rib before it connects to the sternum. Floating ribs do not connect to any cartilage. They don't connect directly to the sternum. So true ribs are number 1 through 7, false are 8 through 12, and then floating are 11 and 12. You don't need to know the parts of the ribs, so we'll kind of skip over this one. The sternum is the chest bone, and the sternum has 3 major regions: the manubrium, which is the top, the body, which is a majority of the middle part here, And then the xiphoid process is this region down here. The xiphoid process most commonly breaks when somebody inappropriately administers CPR. If they do chest compressions in the wrong region, this is at a high risk of breaking. Then we have the hyoid bone in the neck. So here it is. To me, it looks like little vampire teeth. So you see these little nubs that stick up, and that's going to be in the neck there. It serves as a point of attachment for the tongue, so it allows for tongue movement, and it's the only bone in the body that doesn't connect directly to another bone. In large cats, this is the bone that allows them to purr and roar. But in humans, it's just going to aid in tongue movement, so that allows us our sense of speech, or our ability to speak, and it allows us to move our tongue to swallow food.